Ever wonder how a getaway driver can get slapped with a murder charge, just like the person who actually pulled the trigger? It seems kind of wild, right? Well, that question really gets to the core of how the law deals with crimes committed by a group. And today, we're going to unpack exactly that, using India's brand new criminal code, the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, or BNS for short. Let's dive in.
Okay, so before we jump into the deep end, we need a simple framework. Let's break down the anatomy of pretty much any crime. It usually happens in 4 stages. First, you've got the idea, that's contemplation. Then getting everything ready, that's preparation. Next is the attempt, actually trying to do it. And finally, the accomplishment, the final act itself. You'll want to keep these 4 stages in your head because they're going to be super important for making sense of all this.
All right, let's make this real with a story. Think of it like a movie. We've got our cast of characters. First up, the mastermind. He's the brains of the operation, the one supplying the weapons. Then we have the shooter, the guy who's going to do the dirty work. And finally, the biker, our getaway driver. And what's their big plan? It's simple, and it's deadly. They're going to murder their rival, a guy named Sardar Khan.
Now get this, right here, back in that very first stage, contemplation, the idea phase, a crime has already been committed. I'm not kidding. Under the new BNS, this is called criminal conspiracy. And the key thing to understand is that the second our little crew agreed on the plan, boom. That agreement alone, just the meeting of the minds, is a crime the law can punish.
And this is actually a really big shift from the old law. If you look at the old way of doing things, you often needed some kind of follow-up act. Someone had to do something for the conspiracy to stick. But now, under the BNS, for serious crimes like this one, nope. The agreement itself is the crime. That's it. You don't need any other action to prove there was a conspiracy.
So, let that sink in. Just for sitting in a room and agreeing to a plan, all 3 of them, the mastermind, the shooter, and the biker, can be charged with criminal conspiracy to commit murder. They haven't bought a thing, haven't driven anywhere, but legally speaking, they're already in hot water.
Okay, let's fast forward. We're now at the final stage of our 4-step crime plan, accomplishment. The plan is officially a go. The shooter and the biker pull up to the scene. The biker's outside, engine running, ready for a quick escape. The shooter heads inside. And our mastermind? He's nowhere near the place. He's miles away, probably thinking his hands are clean.
So, okay, the shooter, he's obviously guilty of murder. No question there. But what about our biker? He didn't go inside. He never touched the weapon. He didn't even see the victim. So is he also guilty of murder? This is where things get really fascinating and where the law starts to connect the dots between everyone involved.
Well, the answer is yes, and it comes down to another really powerful legal idea called common intention. What does that mean? Basically, when a group of people act together to achieve a shared criminal goal, the law pretty much says, you know what? I don't care who drove the car and who fired the gun. It treats each person as if they did the whole thing all by themselves. So you might be thinking, wait, how is this different from that conspiracy thing we just talked about? It really just boils down to 2 things, timing and location. Conspiracy is all about the plan that happens before the crime, and it can happen anywhere. Common intention, on the other hand, is all about the action. It applies to the people who are right there actively participating at the scene of the crime. And that's the huge difference.
Here's a cool way to think about how the law looks at this. It doesn't see driving the bike and firing the gun as 2 totally separate things. No, it bundles them together. It sees this whole series of actions done by different people as one single combined criminal act, the act of murder.
So yeah, the shooter's action is what directly caused the death. But the biker's role? It was supportive, right? It was totally essential to the plan's success. And because they were both there, sharing that common intention at the scene, the law says, yep, the biker is just as guilty of murder as the shooter. No difference.
So let's tally up the final charges, shall we? The mastermind, he's only on the hook for conspiracy, because remember, he wasn't there. But the shooter and the biker, oof, they get hit with a double whammy. They're both guilty of conspiracy for making the plan, and they're both guilty of murder because of what they did at the scene with that common intention.
But hang on, this brings up a massive question, right? What happens when things don't go according to plan? What if something totally unexpected happens? Is the whole group responsible for every single thing that goes down in the heat of the moment, even the stuff they didn't plan for? Let's throw a couple of wrenches into our story and see where the law draws the line.
Okay, scenario A. Imagine as our guys are heading in, a security guard suddenly gets in their way. To get past him and stick to the plan, one of them kills the guard. Now, this was never part of the original conversation. It just happened.
So, what happens here? Are they all guilty? You bet they are. The entire group that's present would be on the hook for the guard's murder. Now, why is that? Well, even though they didn't sit down and plan to kill a guard, that act was necessary to achieve their main goal. It was done, as the law says, in furtherance of their common intention. It was a step they had to take to get to Sardar Khan.
All right, now for scenario B. Let's shake things up. The main job is done, Sardar Khan is dead, and they're on their way out. But then one of the crew members spots a bystander with an expensive watch and, just on a whim, decides to rob them. This wasn't part of the plan at all. It was totally spontaneous, a personal little side hustle.
And this is where the law says, whoa, hold on. In this case, only the person who actually did the robbing is guilty of robbery. The rest of the crew? They're in the clear for that one. And the reason is simple. Robbing that bystander had absolutely nothing to do with their shared plan to commit murder. It was a completely separate, independent act.
And those two scenarios perfectly highlight the most important phrase you need to remember in all of this: in furtherance of the common intention. Group liability isn't a blank check. It only covers the acts that are actually done to help move that original shared plan forward. Anything else, that's on the individual who did it.
So let's just boil it all down to the key takeaways. First, you've got criminal conspiracy. That's all about the agreement, the plan made before the crime. Then there's common intention. That's about active participation, the unified action during the crime. And finally, that all-important phrase, in furtherance of, which acts like a boundary, setting crucial limits on just how far group guilt can stretch.
Which really leaves us with this final, lingering question. The law does its best to draw these clean, neat lines between shared responsibility and individual guilt. But in the real world, in the heat and chaos of a crime gone wrong, where exactly is that line? Figuring out where that group responsibility stops and individual blame starts, well, that's probably the toughest challenge there is.